Hello witches, and welcome back to Activist Witch, where we discuss witchcraft and activism. You can call me Isha, my pronouns are she, they, and in today's video we're going to try and deconstruct some of the racist comments that I had for the cultural appropriation video that try to pass themselves as constructive criticism, and we're just going to see exactly where they come from, what is the rationale behind them, and ultimately why, despite presenting opposing arguments between each other, they all aim to do the same thing, which is telling me to shut the fuck up. But before we get started, let me remind you that I've opened a Ko-fi, and on there you can do a one-off donation, a monthly donation, or even get a tarot reading with me, Italian style. The low-income option starts at £5. Tarot readings are now limited to just a few per month, so if you don't manage this month, they will reset on the 1st of the next month. And hey, if you decide to support me there, thank you so very much. So the premise here is that I'm going to discuss the larger arguments and where they come from of most comments that I've got against my video on cultural appropriation, and how they actually all connect to the same themes. But if you want a very detailed sort of sentence by sentence breakdown and deconstruction, you find a very, very long Substack. My Substack is linked down in the description below. If you're already a subscriber, you might have received it this last week. If not, you can go, it's a post there, and we go bit by bit in every one of these comments, going specifically into the kind of attacks that they do and the reasons why. So there are ad hominems, there are false equivalences. It's literally giving you an example of applying critical thinking to statements and intentions and actions, and understanding why they conflict with each other, what the purpose of that is, to give you an idea if you see it in the wild, so you have the precise example. In here, because otherwise we would be making 10 videos going by argument and why it's intellectually dishonest. I am going to bring together the original reason why there even were arguments, despite not only the reasoning but the sources that I brought in the previous video, completely disregarded and basically ultimately also called me racist against white people, which is a very fascinating argument. And it's actually about something that I learned myself, because one of the main things that connects all this criticism that I have got is the need to ultimately tell me, you don't know what you're talking about, you don't have the authority to talk about this, you're talking rubbish, stop talking. The concept of stop talking, it's what I've discovered is described as epistemicide. You learn something new every day. Yes, it sounds like a complicated word. Epistemology is the study of knowledge, so we're talking about knowledge and information. It is a concept that is brought up a lot in the colonial studies, decolonization, because it's literally defined as the killing, silencing, and annihilation or devaluing of a knowledge or system. Does it sound familiar? It has basically to do with systemic and structured oppression, which, as you might have noticed in the other video, relates to the will of privilege and systems of powers, because intersectionality looks at how power influences people that are more marginalized. And the interesting thing was noticing that some of the arguments brought were simple whataboutism. So, the oppression that you talk about for people that have been genocided, Native Americans, people whose practices have tried to survive or reconstructed from their origin from African countries because they were transported like chattel to the US to be slaves. And the false equivalence is saying, oh, Europe had a lot of folk practices that have been assimilated by Christianity. That was the same thing. Or, oh, you know, all occult practices come ultimately from antique Mesopotamian, Sanskrit. So really, cultural exchange is what it is. Culture grows with this exchange and coming together. How can you say that taking practices that are, you know, white sage burning, that comes from smudging, that comes from Native American people, how can you say that that is stealing? Then everything is stealing, which I would argue, yes, it probably is when we're talking about stuff like Wicca and ceremonial magic. But something that was particularly interesting to me was the self-victimization of white people. One of the arguments that have come through different ways of showing itself was trying to self-victimize, opposing these two ideas that are actually in conflict with each other. The first was the idea of color blindness. So I don't understand why you're trying to be so divisive in segregating people, calling them white and people of color. We are all people, we all bleed red, and we all have our practices, and we all should come together in this cultural exchange. To me it's peculiar because I talk about cultural exchange done respectfully at the end of the video. So have they not watched the entire video? I'm giving them too much credit, let's not go there. But one point is, we're all the same. Okay. The point that comes next, though, usually, is you need to also stop using this language. The language is the description of the experience of racialized people, so they are people of color in a society that has racialized them as other. And you need to stop doing that, because otherwise it will spur anti-white racism. How to start on this? So the first point is, you might see through this how this is epistemicide, because it's the entire point of you're not allowed to use knowledge in the form of language to describe your experience. Because I'm fragile, because I feel that it attacks me, again, otherwise anti-white racism. But also, no, racism doesn't exist because we're all the same people. So to me, these dual positions are, so which one? Which one do you think it is? Do you think that there isn't racism, we're all the same people, so we should all dance together? Or do you think that the worst thing that could happen is that racism is now applied to you as a white person if it's highlighted the way that you need to be judged when you do wrong things? Which is also different from actual racism, because the idea of being judged for something bad that you've done is consequences of action, whilst racism exists against an identity. You don't choose an identity. It's put on you by the system. You are othered by the system, defining you as non-white. So it's interesting to me to see these things come together. And they all come together to basically say, what you say is not valid. You're not worth listening to. Your experience doesn't matter. Your research doesn't matter, or it's biased, or it's actually openly lying, because I've been accused of that. One of the most fascinating things to me, which is not the first time that it happens, and it was interesting because basically every single one of these comments, if you go on the original video about cultural appropriation, you see that I have called out all these behaviors already, all this kind of attitude from white people, trying to center themselves, trying to claim victimhood, trying to claim the same kind of oppression that genocided culture have, to reclaim their own bloodline and therefore their purity, and therefore closing their practices the same way that closed practices, because they have to survive genocide, do, thinking that it's the same. This idea of exclusivity existing not for preservation, but to cut off other people, to other people, so that white people create an elite. And this difference between white people establishing themselves as an elite above other practices, and the way that people of color instead do preservation in their own practices, which also include being very attentive to what white people steal from you, and then at times asking directly, don't do that, my practice is closed, because when it was open, which Native American practice were at some point, you just chose and stole and denatured everything that I did. So now guess what? You don't get to do anything. So it's also not that white people haven't been given the chance over and over and over again. And these kind of comments reveal how many white people still fall in the same kind of entitlement and in the same kind of belief that the world exists for them. I think one of the most intellectually dishonest things that I have seen so far is that white pagans love to highlight how much has been taken from them by Christianity, how Christianity spread and denatured the folk practices of different regions of Europe and tended to cannibalize We had the goddess Bridget, and now we have Saint Bridget, and that applies to everything. Nice God you have there. Would be a shame if you became a saint, eh? So they seem to understand the work that the Catholic Church did in trying to center and grow power and assimilate things in order to do that and create a structure of power. What they seem to completely refuse to see is how they are doing exactly the same things to practices that are not European by centering white people and their right to access cultures, take from cultures, without crediting, without permission, and just do it and it's fine and then it becomes ours. So the cultural exchange and gathering of power is still fine as long as white pagans do it for their practice that is under the umbrella of witchcraft. However, bad Catholic Church that took away my East European folk practices. Again, which one is it? Why the double standard? It's also worth highlighting that the idea that what the Church did, Catholicism specifically, in go around Europe, missionary work, appropriate folk magic and folk traditions into Catholicism, and what has been done through colonialism are two very different things. The crux of the difference is how the conquered, the opposition subject is treated. In the case of European practices, they have been assimilated and cannibalized because the premise was never put in question that we are people conquering people, bringing different populaces together, but the humanity was never put in question. That is the difference with colonialism. Colonialism applied to the ways that white European people have treated people from Africa, Native American of North and South America, to a degree South Asia, is a kind of behavior that dehumanizes. The entire concept of whiteness was created in the 1600s exactly because European regions were bickering against each other, whilst rightfully the British had their eye very well planted, and the Spanish and the Dutch, on colonialism and the importance of having colonies and the importance of slavery to sustain the colonies. So the concept of whiteness was created at that point to try and not only bring together white European people, but also at the same time create an other, which was everybody that is non-white and non-European, and to take down their humanity. Because if, when we are the Catholic Church and we go around Europe and we see that there are all these folk practices and we just want to extend our power and sort of make it global, and so let's bring these people to us. People subject to colonialism are not considered people, are considered lower or are considered close to animal. African people brought to the colonies were legally considered chattel. There's this not only infantilization, looking at the work of Jung and the shadow work and everything, it's amazing to see how small and dark it's infantilized, another story for another time. But the infantilization and the dehumanization was literally for the idea of, oh, you're not human. You're the link to animal, really. So I don't owe you that respect. I don't owe you that recognition. I don't need to barter with you. I don't need to absorb what you do, like I've done with the tribes within Europe. I can just annihilate you, and I can take what's yours. And now it's mine. And it's not a mystery that the entirety of the richness of Europe, definitely the one of Britain, is built on the slavery and the products made through slavery in the colonies. So what fails to be understood when we compare Christian absorption of culture in Europe to colonization of the Americas through the slavery of Africa, colonization of the southeast of Asia, we fail to understand that there is a process of racialization that literally came again to bring together the white Europeans, to give them an other, to subjugate. The subjugation, you're less than human and I can treat you as an animal, and therefore I don't need to reason with you. I don't need to ask you permission for anything. I don't need to actually trade with you if I can kill you and then take your primary resources. So failing to see this, I understand completely that it's failing to see the process of racialization and trying to equate racialization to simple war between equals. This was not seen as a fight between equals. Again, people from Mesoamerica, from Africa, South Asia, they were seen as animals. So failing to see that there's this crucial difference in how the opponent is seen, if even is considered an opponent, because again, the conquistadors and the colonizer from Europe didn't really need to see them as human at all. They weren't an opponent, they were a nuisance to get rid of, which they mostly did. Failing to see this difference, I understand why it's convenient for white people, because it allows them not to face the fact that whether they have ancestors that they know directly or not, by being white and being born in Europe, they have benefited from the colonialism that has annihilated and murdered and genocided cultures and people. Because at the time they weren't people. How are you going to deal with that? It's better not to. And so let's claim the false equivalence that the Catholic Church going around assimilating gods into sainthood is the same thing as going to Africa, kidnapping people, treating them as product and as chattel, throwing them to the sea, actually, if they are sick, and then exploit their work for nothing, slavery, they are products, to create richness that then goes back to Europe and nothing is given actually to African people, whilst also genociding and killing all the natives and taking all the primary resources that they have, because there's no point in barter with them or giving them anything back if they are animals. And continuing to oppress them to this day as minorities. You have reserves, you have the insane way in which the system is veered against people of color. Have you caught up on what's happening in America about anyone who is not white and Christian? Because it's peculiar to me when we are talking about, no, it's the language that divides us, as if it's not literally systemic and within law to actually treat people differently because of their racialization. Something that I know I need to be careful about is that every time that I get a comment like this, I always take it as face value, as if it was not ill-intentioned, which is my mistake there. And to a degree, before realizing this crucial difference between Europe and everywhere else, I have this understanding, this sympathy in a way for white pagans that are mad at the Catholic Church for what they have taken from them. So, because it's what I usually do also in my intersectionality trainings, I'm always like, I know that there's a way to make white people allies. How do I do that? Let's try with creating sympathy if you have no understanding of empathy. And sympathy needs, a seed of commonality to grow on. So amazing. You are white, pagan, and really frustrated about what has happened to your original folk culture because of Catholicism. Good. It's a very good point to start off. Keep that in mind. Now imagine for a second that you actually are a person that is a descendant of these people that have been genocided. And you're still oppressed to this day. Everything is veered against you legally, systemically. And on top of it, you see the descendants of the people that have genocided you wearing your symbols, using your practices, quite literally wearing the skin of your ancestors on them. The very skin that they were killed for. Can you see why it's important that we make the distinction and understand what has happened to cultures that are non-white? Another attempt at completely invalidating any information that I bring came in the form of ad hominem attacks. I go more in detail in the Substack, but in very short, it's usually when you attack a person, not their argument, attempting to kill their character so that if they are a bad person, if they are a liar, then therefore their argument must be a lie as well, regardless of sources, regardless of validity. I'll be honest, partially I consider this a compliment, because if the main attack that can be given to me is that I am white passing, which is also something that I bring up myself in the video, then it means that my argument is really good, because you couldn't go for it, any of it, you just could go for me. Good stuff. In my extreme mental exercises to try and take at face value what is sold to me, one of the first things that occurred to me when the attack was, to me, at the beginning being too white passing, and by the end I was just a white person cosplaying a person of color, so actually, I'm lying to you, I'm not Arab, all of that kind of stuff. And what fascinated me at the end was, if I were, is any of the stuff that I've said a lie? Is that not verifiable? Have I not put sources? Because I know. That's why I always put sources. That's why usually video essays take much longer for me to do, and I very rarely just sit in front of the camera blabbering, because I've gone through this exact kind of delegitimization, because I am a person of color, because I am femme presenting, because I have this accent in English, because I am autistic, so I go in my tangents. For all these reasons, authority always tries to be taken away from me. Therefore, my arguments and my discussion must be invalid. However, again, first point, okay, let's say that I'm a white person and I am just talking about this stuff. Is that still not verifiable? Is that still not valid? It's interesting that the attack was mainly to me and to my supposed line about my identity, rather than any single point that I presented in 40 minutes of video. It was also very obvious because, to me, I wear it very much on my sleeve that I know that I have white passing privilege. I am very aware of that. I am also very aware that the only people that make me notice that are other white people. It has never happened once that anyone in my community, which I have around me daily, in everyday life, out there, we sit for coffee, none of them ever brought that up. In fact, they were the ones that had to convince me that, girl, no, you don't have that much white passing privilege, and the only people that would say that are white people that want to silence you. Silence is epistemicide, as we saw before. The fascinating thing there to observe is that it is an oxymoron. So it brings together two things that are opposite, still trying to make them work together. So on one side, what I'm saying about anything, and specifically about the experience of people of color, is not valid if I am white. Because again, the step there was even further. It's not just white passing privilege. No, you're white. Somebody was mentioned, Rachel, I don't know them, but through them I discovered a lot of good studies. So again, go check the Substack. It has all the sources and bibliography of this, because I would never come without sources. Because I know I've received, that's the thing, I have received this kind of attack for as long as I have lived. A white person wouldn't have. So if I was just a white woman, the attack on my authority then would be like, go back to the kitchen. But to me, it is compounded because intersectionality, will of privilege. So peculiarly, the reference of who thinks that I don't have authority is always interesting to observe here. Because if the accusation is you're not a person of color, therefore you can speak for people of color, and if that came from people of color, my community, people that know me, that would be something to listen to. Again, the only people that ever accuse me of white passing, or worse, this is the first time it actually happened, to actually be accused of just being white. So that was interesting. That was an interesting development of that. But that always comes from white people. And the only interest of white people to silence me is that what I'm telling them makes them uncomfortable. And coming for me and trying to find reasons to shut me up is what they do. Again, a white person naturally has a level of authority on things that wouldn't make me subject to this kind of attack. Basically, they are trying to use my supposed white passingness as something to beat me with, which white people don't go through this. White women have white tears. It's not what is happening here. Like, literally, the way that I'm being attacked, I'm just being attacked the same way that people of color are attacked, trying to invalidate anything that is their experience, because I am. And in fact, as a mixed race person, I can completely understand why I am this double threat that it's threatening in a way, because I have seen both sides of life now. I know what it's like to be treated when a person sees my triple-barreled Arab name versus when they see me in person. I know what it's like to have people judge me on my accent versus the way that I look. I also know the way that fatness and blackness are equated, fear in the black body, and the way that that was an exacerbation of my racialization in a country like Italy that has never moved past their colonial time. I can basically bring you proof that I've experienced white passing privilege and racism at the same time. So I completely understand why people are just like, that's a bit too much experience. People might start to believe you, shut the hell up. Which I almost fell victim to. Like, my first instinct was, should I list all the experiences from kindergarten that are unequivocally racist, and the way that people instead have turned around the moment that I've seen the color of my skin, the tone, in the last 10, 15 years, because as a child I was unmistakably also of color. Skin lightening does shit to you. One of the last points that I'm going to bring to you in this sum up of the generic comments that I have got against the cultural appropriation video, it's an interesting double standard. That why am I surprised? A rule for me, another one for thee, should be the motto of white people. But specifically, and I mentioned it vaguely in the cultural appropriation video, it's about Orientalism. So, as I mentioned there, Orientalism is this, at times benevolent, they thought, practice of looking at the Near and Far East, very Eurocentric because east of Europe, let's not go there. SWANA is a better acronym than MENA, details in the description below. And so I do understand why in occult practices, in anything that has to do with spirituality, because of how hardcore we went on enlightenment in Europe, we look at the Near and Far East, because they managed to maintain their spiritual practices in spite of enlightenment. They can go together. We decided that no, in Europe. But therefore, we go to them for this spiritual wisdom. So the Orientalism in one sense is there to validate a spiritual practice. If it's rooted in something ancient or of foreign lands that have this cultural spirituality, then it's automatically higher and more validated in spiritual circles. However, at the same time, in the same breath, oh no, it doesn't matter where it comes from, because cultures meet each other, we pick and choose, we grow together. So why do I have to remember exactly where something comes from? Why do I need to credit? Why is it not mine? And an amazing example of that, and it's Tulpamancy. It's Tulpas. I said it. It's Tulpas. This is something that I've actually learned through Raven's research, which was so good. Tulpamancy and the existence of Tulpas as this internal but separate identity from you is something that is sold to come from Tibetan Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism is actually, I didn't know, a closed practice. Why is that? Because of the oppression of China that tries not to make them practice. That's, oppression, systems of powers, who has power over whom, and therefore who needs protection. Which is what always escapes white people when they claim, oh, I need protection too. The system is there for that. But the way that Tulpas and Tulpamancy got to us in the West is through the work of a white woman, Alexandra David Neal, who decided to go for some time with these Tibetan Buddhist monks and try to learn their practices. As white people do, we take information, we re-elaborate it, we might not understand anything about them, but still, from the information that we have misinterpreted, we make something. And she wrote a book talking about Tulpas as if they were is it an internal practice? Is it a spiritual practice? It's up to you to decide at this point. But speaking of it and its validity and trying to give it validity as if coming from Tibetan Buddhism, when in reality that's not. They have nothing like that in Tibetan Buddhism, is what she understood of it, and she made out of all this pick and choosing information of things that she understood wrongly from her time with these Tibetan Buddhist monks. At this point, Tulpas and Tulpamancy are their own thing. I seem to understand they actually exist and work, so it's something that exists on its own right now. What Alexander David Neal succeeded on, which I think it's a feat, is to be able to do the wrong kind of cultural appropriation both ways. Because at this point, if she had just done Tulpas and not mentioned where it comes from, it would have been erasure. So, not crediting. At the same time, she has created something that is not actually of that culture, claiming validity through that culture, so it's actually exploiting Tibetan Buddhism for the authority that it seemed to have in a spiritual context. So, congratulations. If you look closely, you might notice that even in this context, even in the way that this woman tried to use this spiritual Eastern practice as authoritative, the authority comes to it because a white woman took it and wrote about it. You gotta laugh at it. Like, I don't understand. What always surprises me is the disingenuity of white people, because they clearly like to take things as they like, and you can see it in the comments, like the way that they try to validate their actions and trying to make it pass as if it's not an issue, as if they were the people that can decide if that's an issue or not. Guess what? When we are talking about systems of power and oppression, the person that has power over someone that is considered lower does not get to decide what oppression is. The oppressed person tells you, and you fucking listen. So, to me, it's interesting that they do want to do all this stuff. They just want to find a way to spin it around and make it legit. They peculiarly want to be told by the people that they are oppressing, you're doing good. And that is something that sent me a bit in a short circuit, because I do not understand. It seems inauthentic. Like, if you want to do a genocide because you want to take all the primary resources that there were in North America, and you have even gone to consider these people are animals, I don't need to worry about extinguishing them, then why, at what point do you decide, no, it's too much and I need to be told that I am good? Why there's still that cognitive dissonance? Like, why are you not going full throttle? And if there is a cognitive dissonance, and so you realize that there's something wrong, and that's why you need the validation, possibly by your victim, to be told, no, you're doing good, I'm fine, then why can you not grow solidarity from that? Why your first priority is to protect yourself and your way of living, rather than questioning yourself and consider the possibility to grow? And another point, and maybe another time, maybe another video, let me know if you would like one on that, we can absolutely discuss the problematicity of Wicca and ceremonial magic, and the crucial difference that I think exists between witchcraft as opposition and rebellion to the system, as in folk magic and as in the cunning folks, opposed, in direct opposition to the white, cis, het, men and scholars that were studying the grimoire tradition and from which ceremonial magic is made, and how they weren't persecuted for witchcraft, but the cunning folks and witches were. So there's discussion to be had there, by all means. Like, I had people literally accuse me, oh, then you wouldn't have Wicca. And I was like, oh yeah, we can discuss about the appropriation of Wicca, all made by the hands of Gerald Gardner, a white man that mostly stole the research of Margaret Murray about Egyptology and what she researched about the Dianic cults of the 9th century. Do we want to talk about that? Let me know. You know what? I'm half Egyptian. Let's talk about the issue of Egyptologists and the Orientalist lens put on everything that is Egyptian and mysterious. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the Emerald Tablet. Yeah, why not? Let's talk about Thoth. Let's talk about Crowley. But for the moment, I will leave you to the full link on the Substack if you want to go in meticulous detail, line by line, word by word, to deconstruct the white fragility comments that I got. And until the next video, I really hope that we can hex the colonial white patriarchy together, because fuck me if there's need for it.